introduction. So, the plan is I'm going to focus on two projects that I've been working on over the last few years that formed part of my practice-based PhD work. Those projects, one is called Critical Friends and the other one is Performative Interviews. And I'm going to split up the presentation with a film of one of the performative interviews, which is about 20 minutes, so I hope everyone will stay awake. That's fingers crossed. Marnie's given a bit of background to me, and as I say, I've worked as a practitioner for about 6 years, having finished my MA in 2000 in curating at Goldsmiths, and I worked as an independent curator with my colleague Sarah Carrington, and we called ourselves B&B. That lasted for about 6 years until we could no longer afford to work on what we wanted to do anymore. So and Sarah managed to get a job. I delved into doing a PhD, mainly because of my frustration and disillusionment with evaluation, which is what I ended up doing to make a living during my years as working as a curator. I was working, Sarah and I would, I was telling Marnie this earlier, sorry, Sarah and I were working, the things we called ourselves curators, but it's sort of in the loosest possible sense of the word. We attached us, one of the things we would do is attach ourselves to projects that we found needed questioning in some way, and wanted to try and find out a way of providing a sort of space for people involved in those projects that were often sort of labelled as socially engaged, process-based. Often they were publicly funded. And we wanted to really interrogate why on earth these projects were happening in the first place. And we wanted to involve people in that discussion as we went along, and not just the artists and the curators and the commissioners of these things, but the other people involved. So we sort of thought of ourselves as kind of productive parasites of these projects. And probably we were a bit annoying, but weirdly, through doing this a few times, somebody invited us to do this, like on them, for them, or whatever, and they were going to pay us. We were like, oh my God, you're going to pay us to ask difficult questions. And we realised that they were calling that evaluation. And that there was a whole industry of evaluation out there that we could tap into in order to pay our rent. So and it was kind of similar to what we were doing anyway. So we started doing that as a way of earning some money, but also we were thinking, this is great, we're getting paid to be nosy. It's fantastic. And then over the next few years, I became more and more frustrated and disillusioned, as I say, with this process, because as I'm sure many of you have experienced, it's kind of bullshit, this whole evaluation process, when it's commissioned by the very people that you're trying to kind of critique and question and bring into a critical conversation. So either the evaluation report is locked in a drawer, never to see the light of day again, or it's censored and turned into a marketing document in order to attract further funding or to justify money spent. And of course there is a really important role for advocacy and lobbying and justifying money spent. But this has been obviously kind of mixed up with what I would call evaluation and kind of confused with evaluation. And I was coming, I think, at evaluation with an idea of it being more linked to kind of a critical practice, which is, I guess, what Sarah and I were thinking is what we were doing as practitioners. We thought of ourselves as trying to develop a critical practice. And as a research process as well. So that's why I went on that journey of that terrible journey of a PhD, and which ended up being, it took pretty much the length of time of the last term of the Labour government in the UK. So my critique it kind of worked, but not in the way I hoped for. I was critiquing New Labour's social-cultural policy and its connection to social policy. And by the time I'd finished it in 2010, the government had changed. And my critique was no longer relevant. But there were some bits in there which were useful for me to work through and hopefully useful for other people. So these are some of the sort of questions that informed that research. I was going to talk a bit about the context in the UK, but I thought this slide might sum it up, so I'm just going to let you read that. I wanted to somehow change the brief or rethink the brief of the evaluation. So I worked with a friend of mine, Rebecca Maguire, and we devised a proposal which would be about trying to rethink the evaluation process, which usually perhaps would be about me and Rebecca going to interview people over a period of time and turning that into some kind of useful report at the end of it. But we thought we'd rather work with the so-called participants of these projects to become the kind of the critical eyes and ears and become the evaluators themselves of a process, evaluators of the commissioning process itself, of the kind of system that put these projects in place. So sort of turning the tables a bit. It ran over 3 years, and we had a small group of I worked with a small group of what came to be called critical friends, and they included Rachel Gibson, Arthur Hales, Anthony Nicolau, Pete Smith, Dave Sharman, Bree Stitt, Rich Sylvester, Jamie Walker and Anne Webb, all residents of the general area we were working in, which was North Greenwich in London. And so yeah, it sort of evolved as an experiment in collectively deciding who, what and how art commissions are researched and evaluated, and has it's evolved as a process of those critical friends interviewing, for example, commissioned artists, staff of Stream, a board member of Stream, recording responses from neighbours, visiting other examples of commissioning art, and observing, and they were kind of like participant observers of the projects themselves. They also, interestingly, constantly were rethinking and questioning what the hell they would, what was the purpose and role of critical friends in the first place, which was fascinating. Discussions. For example, this is a little conversation we had between ourselves around disagreeing about what it means to be critical. And for example, had this tension between being an advocate for the projects of this local arts organisation, that she really admired the work they were doing, but also asking questions of it as well, appreciating, advocating, questioning. So we're kind of trying to navigate this all the time. The group described their work as developing creative ways of investigating, critiquing and feeding into the commissioning of public and collaborative art, specifically in relation to this art programme that Stream were running, which was called Peninsula, which is Greenwich Peninsula was the rebranded name for that area of North Greenwich, which is where the Millennium Dome is, if you know London. Failure in, let's say, socially engaged art or whatever is made exotic and romanticised and becomes the kind of the sexy thing to talk about and to laugh about and to kind of have fun with. And that I get really angry when that's happened, and I just find that really abhorrent, and I think the reason is because I think it's done to make the artists look good somehow, because they can cope with failure and they can kind of brush it off and move on. And I think actually I want to wallow in it a bit. I want to wallow in it and go, that's the feels like I want to listen to it more. I want to listen to the messy bits more than I do the glossy photos of kids smiling, which I'm not interested in, because I don't think that's true. Nothing is ever a true representation of what happened. But how are we presenting and moving our work forward in a complex and critically interesting way?